What you just saw was from a TED Talk called It Takes a Village to Recover from Drug Addiction by Charlotte Coleman. And I wanted to share it with you today because we're introducing our Daylight Recovery Group as we speak. I'm pretty excited about this. And Daylight Church started, we're coming up on 9 years next month. Started 9 years ago. I know it's been a long journey. I hear my voice. Nice. I said from the beginning that I was going to do this thing for 10 years minimum. That was my commitment going in. I think longevity of a pastor is important for a church, and so I said, I'm giving it 10 years for sure, minimum. And somebody asked me recently, what happens on year 10? And it kind of depends on when you ask me. There have been times when I'd say, nope, I'm done. And there's times that I'm real excited. And as that benchmark approaches, I find myself asking the question, why? Like, why do this thing? I've committed my life to it. A lot of you have committed a lot of time and effort and energy to this Daylight Church vision and dream. And the question why pops in my head a lot. It's kind of an existential question of what am I going to donate my life to? And hopefully your church involvement is something that you think about that as well. Is this thing worth investing my time and energy and resources and finances and my relationships, my family into? And I'll tell you, we've accomplished a lot in 10 years. We've done the typical church stuff. We advertise as a church for not so churchy people, and baked into that is that we are a church and we do churchy things, but we're a church that's for the not so churchy. And we've done all the churchy things. We've done communion together, and we've had potlucks together, and we've had Bible studies and outreach ministries and so forth. We've heard some of the best sermons ever preached. I mean, it's been. Kara does get up here a couple times a year, and so you guys have been very, very blessed and excited to hear her. But I'll tell you what cranks my tractor, so to speak, in Western Kentucky lingo. What really gets my juices flowing and makes me want to do this thing for another 20 years or 10 years or maybe 8 months or whatever it is, depending on the day. It can be summed up with what we experienced last week here in this room. We stuffed bags for a ministry to people that don't typically get food. We all got in a chain in the back of this room, and we stuffed 500 bags. We walked in a circle. We stuffed them full of food from a food pantry in Indianapolis that had been delivered to us, and it'll go out on the streets, and people who normally don't get good food will get good food. And while we did it, it was quite a diverse group. We're not as racially diverse as I wish our church would be, but as far as socioeconomics and worldview and sides of the political aisle, we're age demographics, we're a pretty diverse bunch. And everybody was laughing and hugging and getting along really well while we stuffed bags for people who are less fortunate than we are. That's the stuff that gets me going. That's the stuff that I think I can commit to this thing. I can do this thing for another 10 years. I'm not sure what you're clapping for, but I mentioned I did a sermon on the question of can we talk about transgender folks a few months back. And during that sermon, I talked about a prophecy that was given over a group of pastors that I was a part of on a Zoom call. It was a meeting of pastors, and they were talking about ministry to the LGBT plus community. And at the end, the guy leading it asked another guy to pray, but asked him to pray prophetically. And if you're not familiar with what prophecy is just speaking on God's behalf, is kind of downloading a message from God and delivering that message to whomever you're speaking with. The speaker said something along these lines, and I shared it during that sermon, and I hold to it today. He said, may you be overwhelmed with the marginalized, the hurting, the outcasts, and the rejected, those who feel unloved by others and unloved by God. And in that conversation, we were talking about the LGBT plus community and how typically the church, and especially the Western evangelical church, doesn't much want to have anything to do with them. And we issued an open invitation for people from said community to join us at Daylight Church and feel welcome and included and hopefully safe. But I want to add another category of people who have typically been marginalized, outcasts that are hurting and rejected, and that's the people who are suffering from addiction. And what you're going to discover today is that addiction recovery doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't happen alone. It happens in community. There was a survey done in the UK talking about addiction recovery and people's vibe about addiction recovery, people's feelings about people who are addicts and how they can get help. And what they found was that universally, the typical response for most people in the UK was something along the lines of this: I support help for people in recovery as long as it's not in my backyard. So then that obviously begs the question of whose backyard are they supposed to recover in? And I want to say this backyard. I want to say this room, this pavilion, this grounds. I want to open it up to people that it opens up a mess. It does. It can be challenging. But I want us to be a community where people who have a hard time finding community find community. And so we're going to work hard to establish daylight recovery. See, business as usual for a church. And please don't misunderstand me. The baptisms, the communions, the potlucks, the Bible studies, all crazy important and all a very important part about being a church. But I also, in addition to saying I wanted to do this for 10 years minimum, I also said I don't want to be the pastor that pastors a church where the same people sit in the same seats, in the same pews, living the same lives that they always have. I want to see change in people's lives. I want to see positive change in people's lives. I want to see transformation, connection with Jesus, love for God, and love for others. I want to see people transformed. And so that requires a mess. It requires creating the potential for messy stuff. It can't be cut and dried and easy to do so. There's this passage in Matthew 9 where Jesus is followed by multitudinous crowds, just massive crowds of people, and he's tired. But it says this: when he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless. To me, these communities that we're talking about, the LGBT plus community, has definitely certainly been harassed by the church historically. And I don't mean to put these two together as if they correspond. That's not the intention here at all. But that is a harassed community by the church, oftentimes. And what I'm discovering more about the community in recovery is there's a helplessness with recovery. You just absolutely cannot do it alone. It's neurologically wired into your system. You've got to have a community, you've got to have doctors, you've got to have people that know their stuff to talk you through stuff, to rewire the neurons in your brain. It's a, for all intents and purposes, a helpless community. The Christian church has often said if they would just grab themselves by the bootstraps and pick themselves up, if they just get a job, for example, you hear that kind of stuff all the time. That's not showing compassion for a community that is in some sense powerless to help themselves. They need someone to give them a leg up. And it's interesting that Jesus followed this passage about compassion for the harassed and helpless with this saying. He follows it immediately with this saying. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest." And so transformation requires people that will come alongside other folks and help them transform, help them see transformation, help them see the love of God and see the love of a community that will stand beside them. So with that in mind, that's my introduction to introduce Cindy Burfield, who's going to join me on the platform today for a Convos. We used to call this Convos with cool folks, but it didn't roll off the tongue quite easily, so now we just call it Convos, but Cindy is definitely a cool folk. She fits into that category. Cindy is going to be starting our recovery group, our recovery community here at Daylight. And when we do Convos, this is her, by the way. There she is. You can see her on the screen, and you can see her live and in person. Hi, Cindy. So when we do Convos with cool folks, they're completely unscripted conversations. She came up to me right before the service and said, we haven't talked about what we're going to talk about, and we haven't. So what I'd like to do is, first off, talk about who the heck are you? Like, why are you qualified? What are you like, tell us a bit about your background when it comes to recovery, and I think you've got some history with anger management and so forth, and so give us kind of the lowdown on who you are and
First,
go from there.
Experienced. Okay.
First, I want to say that the fact that I came up and asked you that, and your answer was exactly the right answer, especially because yesterday I spent a whole lot of time thinking about what I should pinpoint, what I should focus on, maybe what I should bring out. And it all had to do with some of the things you mentioned, neurology, physiology, all of those aspects of recovery and addiction. And, it just wasn't clicking. It wasn't working at all. And I was like, okay, God, I got to talk tomorrow. What am I going to say? And at 3:30 this morning, when I woke up and couldn't go back to sleep, it just all clicked into place. And it's not about any of those things. Those things are tools, and they're important, but that's not what it's about. It's about the heart. It's about love. And what I've discovered in this journey, yes, I started out in working with families who had addiction problems, had lost their kids. And I went from there to working at Priscilla's place. And then working on my own, met a ton of people. And in the last year or so, I've been interviewing a lot. I've been spending a lot of time with people in addiction and just asking them the questions that He's brought them to my awareness. And when I always ask, what is the most important component of recovery? What I get from every single one of them is love and acceptance. It's heart. It's people loving me, people accepting me, people not judging me, people that let me fall down and pick me back up again. It's not, part of what I'm going to be doing is teaching those things, like how does the body respond? Because, knowledge is power. And I think that those things are important. But they will never, never, never take the place of just love and acceptance. And so that's kind of where I've come from. And it's interesting that within my own family, when I was growing up, my dad had a problem with alcohol. I didn't understand it at all. I knew that he drank, and I knew that sometimes it was ugly. But he was a very functional person, owned his own business, was very successful. And the things that we saw within our home weren't seen by most people outside of our home. My brother, all of my siblings, as a matter of fact, had issues with drugs when we were younger. Friends in school. And then within my own family as well. There were issues of abusing alcohol, abusing drugs. I never did any of it, never got caught up in any of it. But I was an observer all the time. And then I went to work at Priscilla's place, which interestingly enough came about through my association with you in Daylight Church. The job was offered to me. Didn't feel qualified, but had no idea what I was doing. So I went in and I started working there. And I was trained in anger management. I'm an anger management specialist. So I went in there and I did anger management classes for the girls as well as, running the program. And as I went on, what I began to realize through the years in talking to them was that the same things that affected people in the realm of losing control of their emotions and anger were the same things that affected them in addiction. So I started doing my own homework and doing my own research and realized that the same areas of the brain were affected. The same chemicals that were affecting anger management were affecting addiction. So I went on and I got further training and I talked a lot more. And when I left Teen Challenge, I began working with girls on my own. And then in the last, ever since losing my nephew, great nephew, to suicide at the age of 13, and some mental health issues with people very close to me, and realizing that without fail, every addict that I ever worked with also had mental health issues. So I began to draw a correlation between the three things: anger management, addiction, and mental health issues. So I started to get additional training in the mental health end of it, and again found out that those same factors were playing through all of it. So all of those things are important, and I say that because it's very important to acknowledge that and to understand that connection in those areas. But with all of them, it's also important to realize that people don't recover and they don't get better without other people. And if they're going to try to get better on their own, and there are words for it in the addiction community, when you're just trying to do it your own, by your own strength, and they call it white knuckling it. Now, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get clean just because I need to and I want to. It doesn't work because you can't do that alone. You have to have somebody that believes in you. So through all of this, God was always speaking to me about the faith issue. And research, let's go outside of the realm of my speaking to addicts, and let's go into research for a moment. And research indicates and very clearly shows that the biggest factor in recovery is hope. You have to have hope. If you don't have hope, you have no reason to try. And that's a spiritual component of it to me, because, there is, even AA, the second step of AA, you acknowledge that there's a power greater than you. If you don't acknowledge that anything is greater than you, you have nothing to put your hope into. So hope is like the biggest component after community, and they kind of go hand in hand anyway. You can't really separate one from the other. So that is what brought me up here today. God's been speaking to me for a couple of years about a recovery ministry. Do I feel qualified? Sorry, absolutely not. I don't feel qualified at all. And so many times I've literally said to myself, I can't do this. I'm walking away from it. It's never working out. Nothing that I put my mind to do is ever working out or ever tries. Invariably, every single time, within hours, I've gotten a phone call from somebody out of the blue, random, asking for help. And I've taken that to just pick myself up and go on and say, I can't just give up. I can't just walk away. So it's taken a long time to get here and to actually see this happening. But I'm very connected to it. And my vision and my goal for this ministry is, it's educational. I want to help because, like I said, knowledge is power. If you don't understand that there are things that happen within you when you're attempting recovery or when you're in the midst of addiction that are beyond your control. Your body was designed by God to respond in certain ways to certain stimulus. You don't have any control over that. We breathe because we breathe, and we can't live without it. Well, for example, when you get angry or when you get triggered, there are parts of your brain that are stimulated that you have no control over. And there is a conditioned response, not a conditioned response, but an automatic response to that. In the case of addiction, many people feel ashamed of those responses. They're ashamed, they're fearful, they're afraid, they blame themselves, they're guilty. So what do? They turn around and run so that nobody sees it, because that's what shame does. Shame makes you hide. And if you're in addiction or if you're attempting recovery, and you become ashamed because you mess up, and you run away and hide instead of going to a community that's going to say, it's okay, your recovery is halted right there. When I worked at Teen Challenge, the one thing that I told the women that were getting ready to graduate, it wasn't real popular with some people, but it's the truth. I expect you to fail. I expect you to relapse. I expect you to walk out of here and at some point in time, pick up your drug again and use it again. Maybe you won't. If you don't, that's awesome. But if you don't, you're not the norm. And it's only a mistake if you stay there. If you stay where you are or go further down back into your addiction, then it's not a good thing. But if you learn from it and pick up from it, then you grow and you learn and you're another step on your recovery journey. I just spoke with a woman yesterday. She called me and we were talking, and she's been an addict since she was 14 years old. She's in her 30s now, and she's been in recovery off and on probably 5 or 6 times. She's always gone back. Last time she went back into her addiction, she died several times. took them hours to get her back to where she stabilized, and they weren't losing her again. That was her rock bottom. And since that time, that was about 3 months ago, she's relapsed twice in those 3 months. Every single time she did it once, and as soon as she realized what she had done, she called someone. And they loved her, and she learned from it. And she is so much further along right now than she was 3 months ago when she decided, I'm doing this recovery thing again. Totally different person because she's fallen, and she's had a community around her that said, it's okay, that's all right, get up.
Yep.
And that's what keeps me here. That's what keeps me coming back.
So I'm struck with how you say, I feel unqualified, how uniquely that qualifies you. So if we're talking about a community that needs to ask for help, how much more should the leader ask for help? And I will also say this. I said, introduce yourself, and you went for a long time with all kinds of facts and statistics and stories, and you're an expert in this. So don't question that at all. But I love the reality that you're saying, I can't do this alone.
Yeah, I can't do that.
So if daylight is going to be, I showed the UK quote from the survey about how I believe in support for people in recovery as long as it's not my backyard. In order to create a safe place, in order to create a backyard that is safe for people in recovery, I think it's important to confront stigma. I think it's important to confront the types of people we're dealing with, because if you say addict or you say person in recovery, every person in this room and every person watching online is going to have a different perspective on. They're going to picture something different. Mm-hmm. Odds are that perspective is shaped tremendously by their experiences with people in recovery. If they've never rubbed elbows with people in recovery, they're going to have one particular view. If they have, they're going to have a different view. But talk about the stigma. Talk about the types of people that find themselves in recovery.
It's interesting that you would mention that because I was just, actually my son's here, I was just sharing with him that I realized the other day that right now, currently, I'm working with 4 different women. They're all in different states. One of them is in Illinois. She's the one I just referenced earlier. And she, great family, grew up in a good family, but her addiction took her into what they call the war zone of Chicago. So she's experienced what you see and hear about in the songs and the raps and all of that kind of stuff, and the typical view of what addiction is. I was just out and spent about 10 days with her, and wanted her to take me to where she was when she was on the streets. She wouldn't even take me there. She said it was too dangerous to go there. So she's the one thing, and you'll see it in movies. You see it, you hear it in the music. That's your typical addict, and it's where you're talking violence, you're talking all kinds of sordid lifestyles and behaviors, trap houses, people passed out on the streets. That's typically what I understand people who think of addiction. There's also the other side of that goes along with crime, violence, being untrustworthy, people who you just wouldn't, you don't want your kids around them, you don't want anybody else around them, because that's the stereotype. And that's true. There's a truth to that. And then let's talk about the one that is in Alabama. Okay, she's used to work in recovery. She was an addict, worked in recovery. Now she's back into addiction, although she tells me she's clean now. I'm not really sure. But she's homeless, and she's trying to recover while she's on the street. That's another stereotype that you see, the homeless addict who's maybe sitting in the doorway or whatever, and maybe they're not really into terrible stuff, but they're just kind of hanging out on the street. That's another stigma. Again, somebody you wouldn't trust or wouldn't really want to be around your family that much. Then you've got, I know another girl who's in the mountains of Pennsylvania, and she comes from a town, no, she comes from a county with less than 5,000 people in the entire county. Less than 5,000 in the whole county. Very rural, very small town. You know, she was the girl from the other side of the tracks, I guess you would say, and never experienced what a lot of these other people experienced. Yet she's in recovery now. She's done pretty well for herself, but she was probably an addict for 10 years. Looked down on in a small community simply because of who she was, which, you know, all those things contribute to going into addiction in the first place. You know, what do people think of you? What expectations are put on you? All of that works. So, and the last one is a girl who, great family, has never experienced anything that any of these other three have. Probably would have culture shock if she ever did. Yes, she's a recovering addict also. She's relapsed twice, I believe. She's back in recovery now. She's doing well for herself. You know, her family is a good family. They've lived in a good area. She never experienced anything else. She had the typical upbringing as a child. You know, there were issues within her home that were none of her doing and none of her family's doing, but just things that happened to people led her into addiction. But, you know, nice neighborhood, nice house, nice cars, clothes, all of it, you know, pretty good, pretty well-off family. And she's the not so typical picture of addiction. Most people don't see that. You know, they wouldn't look at her or look at her life and think addict because she doesn't fit the stereotype. So I think when you look at a stereotype of addiction, we all know what it looks like because we all watch TV, we all listen to the music, we all see people, you know, you go downtown Louisville, you see people tweaking out on the street all the time. And that's your picture, most people's picture of addiction, unless they've experienced it or they know somebody who presents a different picture. But if you don't really have that understanding of it, then you're gonna look at probably the first two that I described, and that's what you're gonna think of in addiction. You know, in Teen Challenge, I worked with several women who became addicts through prescription drugs. You know, they were in accidents. As a matter of fact, one of the women that I just talked about, that's what happened to her. And, you know, trying to live a functional life, and you get pulled into something, and once you're in it, you're in it. Mm-hmm. And you might not be typical, but you're still an addict. So I think when they talk about not in my backyard, they're mostly talking about those people who aren't, you have functional alcoholics and you have functional addicts. You have people who are addicts that you would never even believe that they're using drugs because they know how to, or they haven't gotten to the point where they can't balance life and their addiction yet. That usually happens on down the road, but not in the beginning. So I think most people, when they think addiction, they're thinking of the most negative part of it.
And even still, with that picture in mind, there can be this propensity as human beings to say, the normal one could fit in here. The one who has a job and is functional, maybe we can make space for that one, yes, but not the one sitting in the door tweaking out. And exactly. I know the girl you're talking about in Chicago, right?
Yeah.
She's a sweetheart. She's an absolute sweetheart, full of love. She's tender and compassionate and smart as a whip and really, really struggling. Yeah. And so when we talk about creating a backyard or a space for people in recovery, we're talking about the whole gambit. And recognizing that the vision you have of the person on the street or the criminal or whatever the negativity is that you would attach to it is a human being with a soul created in the image of God. And we want to create space for everyone in this community, not just the ones that are easy, not just the ones that fit in well.
Yeah, everybody has a story. Everybody does. Addiction doesn't just happen. I mean, there's a whole lot of scientific and research being done that does give a propensity to a genetic model. But putting that aside, it doesn't really matter because within my family, like I said, I was the only one, 4 siblings in my family. I was the only one that did not at least experiment with drugs. Definitely, if you're going to go with the genetic model, it was there for me. All of my friends did, just about. I was with them when they did. I just never said yes. You know, I never chose to go that route. But there are things in people's lives that affect them, and I'm sure we all know that nobody's got the perfect life. Nobody has the perfect life. Things happen in people's lives that lead them in certain directions. And addiction, yeah, you know, I'm from the whole just say no era, when, you know, that's what we heard in school, and that's what everybody believed. Addiction hadn't really been studied. They didn't know much about it at the time. That was, you know, you turn on your TV every day and there's these, you know, commercials up there, just say no. It's not that easy. And once you have tried it, and some people are much more susceptible to becoming addicts quickly than others are, it actually does change your body chemistry and your brain chemistry. It might start out as a choice. You know, maybe, you know, you're out with your buddies or your friends one night, and somebody's messing around. They say, here, try it. Yeah, at that point, you can just say no. But if you're one of those people that gets addicted that quickly and you don't, because you're foolish or you're young or whatever reason, you know, people do the things that they do. Once you use, even once, usually a little more than that, once you start playing around with it, it does change your metabolism, your body chemistry to meet the scientific definition of a disease. So it can start as a choice and very, very quickly move into a disease. And once you've entered that disease model, you lose control.
So we've got 4 minutes left. I have the privilege of sitting with Cindy at lunches occasionally and getting to hear more and more about her Heart for the Addiction community and the recovery community. And I'm very thankful for that. What can we do? So in 4 minutes, what's the plan? How can we help?
Okay. My goal, my vision for this is first and foremost to create 2 communities of a sort. The first one is a community of addicts, because addicts, for the most part, depend on other addicts. That's where they get their support, their understanding, and their love from. An addict understands an addict, and they're there for each other. And it doesn't matter how many times they fall down, the other ones will help them get back up again, because that's what it's about. They've been there, they understand that. Like we were talking about, most people don't understand that. So my view, my vision, my goal is to create a sub-community of a bigger community. I would like to see Daylight be the bigger community. I would like to see Daylight learn how to love addicts for who they are and what they learn, to learn about addiction, to understand about addiction, and to look at people, even if they come in the door and, you know, and they've fallen off, you know, and love them anyway, and be the one to extend a hand and say, come on, let me help you up. Wrap your arms around them, not necessarily literally, but let them know that you're not judging. You're not looking at them and finding all the things that are wrong with them, or running, you know, to make sure that nothing's in danger that's in your life. There's boundaries that have to be put in place, absolutely, but those things come secondary to love. So I would like to see the people that we invite in, the people that we bring in to this community of addicts, also find community in the church, that in our church, in our family, because we are a family, and they need family. Most of them have lost their families. So if you can have that kind of love expressed, they're getting love on 2 different levels. They're getting love from one another, and they're getting love from people that most of the time they don't get love from.
So practically, we've got a clipboard in the back with signups. So Cindy is going to be doing some practical training, brainstorming. What else are you going to be doing with people so if you have an interest in being involved directly with this community and directly with what Cindy is going to be doing, the clipboard is the way to initiate that. You just put your name, email, phone number, she'll be in touch and start talking about meeting together, getting training.
Yeah. What I'd like to do is, if you have any interest at all, if there's anything within you that's saying, I think I might be interested in this, what I'm going to do is try to set up a training. It won't be a real long one to start with, but the first maybe half hour or so will be explaining what we're doing and what your role could be. And if you decide after that, maybe I'm not, this isn't it, maybe I'm not really wanting to be part of that, that's fine. I understand that not everybody is called to do this ministry. It's a hard ministry to do. If you do, then there will be training, and then we're going to be having meetings. We're going to have a meeting. I'm going to start opening a meeting here, and what comes out of there is kind of going to be an organic experience. I'm putting it out there. God's going to grow it in the direction He wants it to grow. I have several ideas I need people to brainstorm with. So I'm looking for people for practical help. I'm looking for people who can maybe administratively help and then functionally help me with my part of it.
Do you need to be a priest or a saint or have a master's degree in addiction recovery?
You're much better off if you don't.
Or be a long-time person at Daylight? Can
No,
this be your first time here?
Yeah, I'm looking for people who are looking to help.
Yep.
And that they have a heart's desire to be involved. All it takes is a heart. It takes a heart.
Yep.
You don't need anything else, just a heart.